the biblical calendar that we have in the scriptures. Okay? And the reason for that is that when you go back to the first century, you have Gentile Christ believers and Jewish Christ believers and Jewish non-Christ believers that are worshiping together in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and they're looking at the biblical calendar. We have a separation that happens when Gentile Christ believers eventually break away, and one of the things that allows for the break to really be more clean is the calendar. Because when you're not worshiping with other people on the same day, then you can separate from them and the divide just keeps happening. So you have in the first century, once we have 70 AD and the temple's destroyed, you have Jewish Christ believers and Jewish non-Christ believers who go basically up into Galilee and then later up into Babylon. And the two great centers for Jewish studies are Tiberias. And anybody that goes to Tiberias today will tell you that there is a lot of rich history there. But they also went to Babylon because in Babylon at that time, you could be there as a Jew and not have any problems. If you study post-70 Jewish history, you'll see that there were towns like Sura and Pumbedita and places like this where huge groups of Jews gathered together, and they started these yeshivas that grew to the thousands. On the flip side, Jewish Christ believers coming out of the first century moved very quickly into proto-Catholicism and then into Catholicism, which we had for 1,500 years. If you were going to be a Christ believer and be a Gentile, you were most likely connected to some type of Catholic church, okay? Up until 1500, and we have the Protestant Reformation, okay? Martin Luther, however, had drunk deep from the well of anti-Semitism that came out of the Catholic Church.
He didn't start out that way, but ended up that way.
Didn't start out that way, but although I will say this, and I want to have her come here. I met a young lady who is a PhD scholar from Notre Dame. I'm going to have her come here, and she has put together a PowerPoint where she details in so many areas of Catholic history the anti-Semitism that you see in their stained glass, in their Bible covers. She details it. And she's a graduate PhD graduate Catholic scholar from Notre Dame. So I want to have her come and share this with you. It's very fascinating.
At the end of the service, can you give us her name?
Yes, I will give you her name. She's now teaching at St. Martin's University in their Biblical Studies department. Brilliant lady. Okay, so we separate. You have this separation, and you have Catholicism that has to replace, they realize they have to replace the holy days with holidays. If there's going to be any kind of, when this vacuum is created, they have to fill the vacuum. Okay, so you have to move the Sabbath just one click. You move the Sabbath to Sunday. Pretty simple. That keeps us separated. Okay, then you move the regular Moedim. You start moving those to different days. Have them in the same time frame, in the same period, but you move them just a few clicks. Okay? And like I said, because we were in the Protestant strain, which is now most of your churches that are in America, they're from the Protestant side of things. I will say this, there are a lot of ethnic Jewish believers that are in the Catholic Church. You might be surprised at that. Because if you are in the Middle East, or if you're in Europe and you want to become a Christ believer, all you had at many points was the Catholic Church. In fact, today in Israel, if you say to an Israeli that I'm a Christian, most of them hear I'm a Catholic. And here's one of the reasons for that. If you go to Israel, those of you that have been there know this, that the Catholic Church came to Israel and bought up a lot of property. Bought up tons of property. Almost every site that you go to, you have to go through a Catholic shop on your way out. And there's thousands of people that go through, there's thousands of sites, and it seems like there's a Catholic bookstore or Catholic store at that place. And in order to come through there, in order to get out and exit, you have to go through some Catholic bookstore or some Catholic store of some sort. So for Jewish people looking at Christianity in Israel, what they see is Catholicism. Okay, that's what they see. All right. So what I want to do is I want to go through some bullet points with you on the Moedim, on the appointed times. But I want to start with this one. Go with me to Genesis chapter 1. I'm going to go through these bullet points kind of fast, and then we'll have some discussion. And then I want to go to the Torah portion and make a few comments on a small segment there. All right, Genesis 1:14. We don't even have Adam and Eve yet. So there are no Israelites, there are no Jews, okay, at this point. Verse 14 says, Then God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years. You need to underline that word seasons, because when you see it in your English Bible, it sounds like we're talking about summer, winter, spring, and fall. That's not what that's talking about. That's the Hebrew word moedim, the appointed times. So the reason why we have the luminaries in the sky, sun, moon, and stars, is so that we will be able to track when the moedim appear, okay, when they're coming on the calendar. So this calendar starts out in the first chapter. God has this calendar in mind in chapter 1 before there are ever any Jews or Israelites. Okay. So it's not a Jewish thing. I hear this all the time. The Jewish festivals or the Jewish feasts, these are not Jewish. They were given to the nation of Israel, absolutely. But they belong ultimately to God.
Yep.
They belong to Him. He gives them, but ultimately they belong to Him. And in fact, when we get to the Moedim in Leviticus 23, He says, These are my feasts. He says that a couple times. These belong to me. Because ultimately, who does time belong to? He gives us time, but time ultimately belongs to Him. All right, here's the bullet points. I'm going to go through these quick. And later on, if you want any of the other things that handouts that go with this, I have some extras. But all right, here we go. All Moedim are Sabbaths, but not all Sabbaths are Moedim. Yes.
I'm a little conflicted because isn't every Sabbath a Moedim anyway? Because it's an appointed, He appointed it from the very beginning.
Not Moedim in the sense of, not in the sense of an appointed time for, there's weekly, but it's not, the weekly Sabbath is not called a Moedim. They're not called Moedim in the text. They're Shabbats. So in other words, every volcano is a mountain, but not every mountain is a volcano. So every Moedim is a Sabbath, but not every Sabbath is a Moedim.
But in the Ten Commandments, it says, keep the Sabbath and keep it holy. So
Correct.
that makes it appointed.
Absolutely. So you have weekly Sabbath, you have weekly Sabbath, and then you have Moedim Sabbath. They're separate. They're kind of a separate category,
Okay.
but yet the same. They're in time, because we're talking about time.
Okay.
But I never find the weekly Sabbath called a Moedim. I think there's a distinction there. So because you have the weekly and then the monthly, but the Rosh Chodesh, and then you have the yearly cycle of Sabbath. But they are called Sabbaths, even though they're not on the weekly schedule. Yes.
I was reading somewhere that only one of the feasts was actually considered a Sabbath. The rest were just said not to work or not to do something for the Moedians.
Okay, I'd have to go back through Leviticus 23. I want to do that before I answer that, but I want to go back and check it out. Yeah. All right. Okay, so here it is. Boy, when I go to number 1, we're already good. Wow. And I thought this would be so non-controversial. Yeah. Here we go. We're going fast now. I don't think anybody will have a hope. The only Bible that Yeshua or Paul ever read, studied, and lived was the Hebrew Scriptures. Okay. The only calendar that Yeshua and Paul ever knew and lived was the appointed times. Both Yeshua and Paul were in the synagogue on the Sabbath on a weekly basis. You can look at Luke 4:16 and Acts 17:2. Both say that Acts 17 says that Paul was in the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his custom. Same language is used of Yeshua in Luke 4:16. Yeshua was in the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his custom. Or to put it another way, Jesus never attended church on Sunday. All right. Just another way of saying it. Not that he has anything against Sundays. Within the Hebrew scripture, time is broken down into 3 segments. Weekly Sabbath, monthly Rosh Chodesh, and yearly cycle of Moedim. Okay? So, weekly, new moon, Rosh Chodesh, and then annual cycle of 5. Okay? In the spring, we'll get to those. All right. In Leviticus 23, we have a description given of each festival. By the way, I'm saying festival, but 3 of them are festivals. Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot, and then Sukkot are technically festivals in the sense of one has to pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. Okay? And I cannot call them feasts either because one of them is not a feast. One of them actually is a fast. Okay. But sometimes you will hear in the language, you'll hear them called festivals, or you'll hear them called feasts, even though technically all of them are not festivals and all of them are not feasts. All right. So, next bullet point. The Sabbath is a picture of the world to come. That is the eternal future where all will rest in Him. On the Sabbath, we cease from our labors to focus on God. On the Sabbath, and here it is, both the master and the servant are on the same level as both take time off. It's the great equalizer. You have to let everything go back to the way it should be. The master, who normally is here during the week, and the servant is here on Shabbat, they're both here. They both have the time off. That's the way it's supposed to work.
The kingdom of God is at hand.
That's the kingdom of God. The biblical appointed times are not only the calendar of the Hebrew scripture, but move into the apostolic scriptures as well. Since the only Bible available to Jews living in the first century was the Hebrew scripture, they of necessity continued observing the holy days of Leviticus 23. I must say this, though. Here's a little difficulty. It's often difficult to know that they're observing the festivals because they had other code words for them. Okay? So when you're reading your apostolic scriptures, for instance, in the book of Acts, Yom HaKippurim, notice that's what they called it, Yom HaKippurim, not Yom HaKippur. It's multiple things slaughtered on that day, multiple atonements made that day. But you'll notice in the book of Acts, it's not called Yom HaKippurim, it's called the fast. It is called the fast because everybody knew that the only day that you were required by Torah command to fast was Yom HaKippurim. So we could just say it's the day of the fast. Okay, so they don't say Yom HaKippurim. So you just have to be careful. All right. The biblical appointed times provide us with the calendar for understanding the first coming of Yeshua, spring, and the second coming of Messiah, fall. Time is in God's hands, and He knows the beginning and the end. There are 2 appointed times in the spring. We mentioned these, Pesach and Shavuot, or Passover, and they call it Festival of Weeks. Also, it's called, in your Greek New Testament, it's called, Shavuot is also called Pentecost, 50. Okay. Passover commemorates the Exodus from Egypt, where God delivered His people with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. The apostolic scriptures are clear to note that Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection occurred during the time of Passover. We can debate the actual day and get into the minutia of exactly when, but the biblical writers in the Gospels want us to know that Passover is the timing of His death.
One thing that I was noticing is when you brought Him out of Egypt, He said with the outstretched arms. Well, when Jesus sacrificed Himself, He was outstretched arms. Yeah, good catch. Good catch. Shavuot comes 7 weeks after Passover, as the word Shavuot means weeks. Shavuot commemorates the giving of the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. And then we mentioned this in Greek, Shavuot is known as Pentecost. Like other biblical appointed times, the festivals of Passover and Shavuot occur during times of agricultural harvesting. Wheat and barley are the 2 crops for Passover and Shavuot. By placing the various Moedim at times of harvest, the people would have time to give thanks for God's provision and blessings. In order to discuss the first of the fall appointed times, we will need to discuss the biblical monthly time marker of Rosh Chodesh. I'm not going to go deep into Rosh Chodesh. Like I said, if you want the handout on that,
I give you all the references to Rosh Kodesh. There are 17 of them that we could go through on Rosh Kodesh, okay? New moon. So they were on a lunar cycle. They were waxing and the waning of the moon over a 14 and a half period. Basically 29 to 30, yes.
How about the nebulous first fruits?
Yes. Yeah, the first fruits is an interesting one because it's not a Moedim, but before you can celebrate a Moedim, you have to bring it. So it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one that's hard to pin down as to exactly how you fit it into the whole process. And I'll admit that Messianics have probably been we have done very poorly, in my opinion. This is my opinion. We've done very poorly on Rosh Kodesh. Okay, just marking that because how do you get everybody together for something that's technically not a Shabbat, but yet something you're supposed to commemorate?
Well, I mean,
or mark?
3 days and 3 nights. I mean, the
Yeah.
pinnacle of Yeshua's life is the resurrection, which is the first fruit.
First fruits.
And he
It's called the first
told
fruits. Yeah, I know.
You can't touch me because I haven't risen. You haven't been elevated. I mean, it's the ultimate olah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot to that. Absolutely, absolutely. So that's
But God doesn't say, Yehovah doesn't say on the 17th of the month or the 20th of the month. It's just,
yeah.
you would think if the Passover is on the 14th, then automatically on the 17th we would have first fruits.
Yeah, here's the difficulty. And here's the difficulty. Believe me, I have labored over this and labored over this. I cannot, for whatever reason, and I've tried. I have not been able to get the Synoptic Gospels to line up with John. There's something I'm missing. We have labored over it and labored over it, trying to reconcile and overlay the Gospel of John with the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It may be that John is operating on a different calendar paradigm, because he brings in some things that we don't see in the Synoptics, and his layout of how those all work. He still has it around Passover, but it's an intriguing thing to try to work through it all. I'll just tell you that. Believe me, I've spent a long time trying to work through that. I'm still working.
Well,
So
have you seen Michael Boog's chronological?
I have. Yeah, I have seen his, worked through some of his, not completely convinced, but that's not to say I'm open to it, but here's the thing, and by the way, at one time, we had moon units, where we tried to have people get together for Rosh Kodesh, we called them moon units. Hoping that we could, all right, didn't work, yes.
With the first fruits, wasn't it always the first day of the week, the first day after Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath? That's what I always understood. It's the first day of the week after the weekly. And just that year, it happens to be the third day. But other years, it may have been the third or the second.
That's another great question. Write these down, because I want to go and do some more on these to make sure before I make comment on that, because that's another wonderful issue. This is very sticky. All right, here we go.
You're basically saying we don't quite understand all of it yet?
Yes, we don't. In the biblical text, the months, here it is. In the biblical text, months are given with numbers so that one would say, meet me on the first day of the 7th month. There were 30 days with 12 months in each calendar year. There are 360 days in a lunar calendar. After the Babylonian captivity, the months were given names, and often these names represented the names of pagan idols or gods. We know this. Okay? When you come out of Babylonian captivity, you start seeing names attached to months. Okay. Sidebar. The biblical appointed times are based on the monthly rotations of the moon. The biblical calendar is based on the moon, not the sun. That's a difficulty for many people. All right. Unlike the spring festivals, the fall festivals all occur over a very short time period, starting at the new moon of Tishrei, the 7th month. Okay. So we're coming up to in October 2nd, we will have on the Gregorian calendar, October 2nd, we will have 7th month Tishrei. It's the only biblical festival that by definition has to be a Rosh Kodesh, and a Shabbat, and a Moedim. So it's all three. It's the trifecta. Okay. Now, I know please hear what I'm going to say here in the spirit I'm going to say it. I know that there are political issues. I get it. Believe me, I get it. I study this stuff. I eat this stuff up. I try to figure it out. We may not have it perfect. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me that we have lost the Sabbath. We could have lost rotations counting in the lunar cycle. That's possible. I will say this: the only individual so far that has made any really basic inroads and has done that much with the lunar cycle is Michael Rood. And here's what's interesting: even he comes down to saying that the calendar given to us by Hillel II, the rotations that we had by Hillel II, are very close, within 24 to 48 hours. So if we're off, we're not off by a lot. Even he has said as much. If you look at the rotations, he's gone with the cycle, the sighting of the moon from Israel. And by the way, all of this, the perspective of this is coming from Israel. It's not coming from America. I'll tell you why that would be extremely difficult. There are places in America where it would be very difficult to have a sighting of the moon because it just wouldn't appear for a long time. Alaska, I was just there.
Look outside.
If you look outside Alaska in the summertime, at 10 o'clock at night, it's like this right here. Okay? So your moon, it's hard to even see a moon. Land of the midnight sun. I've been up in Alaska where it's been like this at 1:30 a.m. So if you waited for the sun to go down, you're waiting for a while. Now,
Hold your breath.
on the flip side of that, in the wintertime, the sun will come up at 10 a.m. and be down at 2 p.m. All right, so if you look at Israel, there's about 1 hour difference. Because they're closest to the equator, there's about 1 hour difference in the summer and winter between the cycle of between sunlight and the going down of the sun. Again, I'm using phenomenal language. I know the sun doesn't go down, so don't correct me. The orbiting of our orbit. All right, here we go. The reason we must discuss the monthly time marker of Rosh Chodesh is because the first fall-appointed time occurs on Rosh Chodesh. The first of all, the fall-appointed time is called Yom Teruah. Now, in modern times, it's become known as Rosh Hashanah. Rosh meaning head, Hashanah the year. But in the biblical text, it was known as Yom Teruah, or the day Yom Teruah, the blowing. In modern times, this festival became known as Rosh Hashanah. Within the biblical text, this festival is never called Rosh Hashanah. In fact, Rosh Hashanah is only used once in Ezekiel 37:1, and there it's not referring to any of the Moedim. All right, there are two types of trumpets mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures. The first is the ram's horn, and the second, which is known as the shofar, and then the second is the silver trumpets known as the perin. Those are used by the temple. So the temple had silver trumpets, but most of the people had the shofar, the ram's horn. However, now today they're using the ibex, which is a longer horn, and they're calling it a shofar. But it's really from the ibex. But you'll see this longer horn gives a much deeper sound, and they'll call that the shofar as well, even though technically a shofar, a yovel, another word for it, yovel, and yovel is built off of is jubilee, where we get the word jubilee. So ram's horn, yovel, shofar, ram, not ibex, different animal. All right, but even today they're calling the ibex the shofar. All right, there were two types. Okay, so Yom Teruah is the only biblical festival that by definition is a Sabbath, Rosh Chodesh, and appointed time. Sidebar. Within the biblical text, every appointed time had required sacrifices that were prescribed for that particular festival. Nobody is going to Jerusalem, and nobody has a priesthood, and nobody can do the sacrifices. So here's the point. We are all rehearsing and practicing. As much as I'd like to say that we are keeping the festival, we are commemorating it. Nobody can keep it because we don't have a priesthood, we don't have the sacrifices, we don't have the temple in our control. So even if you lived in Israel, even if you were in and went up to Jerusalem, you couldn't go to the mount, you couldn't go to the Temple Mount and offer sacrifices. Or you could, but you'd probably get killed. And you certainly don't have a priesthood that can help you. Not right now. Although I will say this, Somebody asked me about this. How are we going to know who is a Kohanim? Okay, because you got a lot of people out there saying, well, I'm a Kohanim, I'm a Kohanim, I'm a Levite, I'm a Kohanim. How are we going to know? Especially since most people don't have any proof that they're a Kohanim. Yeah, great. Okay, but here's the key. Here's where I think the answer may lie. This may interest you. There's a book by a man named David Cleveland, who happens to be a scientist. He's got a book called DNA and Tradition. He makes the argument that he believes that they have isolated the genetic code for the Kohanim, and that there are these markers, 24 markers, and that maybe we'll be able to tell who are the Kohanim by the genetic blueprint. That may be one of the ways.
Theoretically, would that include only Aaron or also all of the Levitical line?
It would include those who are, he believes that it's basically the Kohanim, just the Kohanim. Yeah, not the.
Interesting.
Yeah, so read the book, DNA and Tradition. Very fascinating. So maybe, here's why I say this. If you read in the Hebrew scriptures, when they came back out of captivity, Ezra, who was a scribe, and Ezra, who happened to be a Kohanim, made a lot of people upset. And that's because Ezra said, if you want to serve in the second temple, I need to see your credentials. I need to see your genealogical charts to show me that you're a Kohanim. And a lot of people said, they were angry at Ezra because they said, well, we lost them in the captivity. We don't have any genealogical records. We lost them. He said, well, I'm not saying you're not a Kohanim. I'm not saying you're a Levite, but I just can't take you in here until I have proof. Okay, so maybe, fast forward, we've had the Holocaust, and a lot of European Jews lost records in the Holocaust. Okay, lost records, couldn't keep them. Okay, they were destroyed or lost or whatever. Maybe the DNA and Tradition thing is the way to go. Maybe this genetic blueprint is there, this genetic fingerprint is there, and that will be the way that we'll be able to tell who the tribes are and unlock that secret. I don't know. All right, moving on. God has a plan.
Yep.
And ultimately, God knows. All right, so continuing on. So well were the biblical appointed times that twice the Apostle Paul mentions the blowing of trumpets, but never describes when these trumpets will be blown. I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 15:52 and 1 Thessalonians 4:16. The Apostle Paul talks about this last trumpet and these trumpets blowing, and you're saying to yourself, well, Paul, any discussion about this? Any insight? No, you're supposed to know when this is going to happen. There are twice when you have trumpets blown, they have to be blown in the scriptures. You have to blow trumpets on Yom Teruah. Here's a little known fact. You also have to blow in the Shemitah year. You have to blow trumpet on Yom Kippur. On the 50th, on the Yovel, on the 50th year, you have to blow the shofar then as well, by Torah command. So Yom Teruah, Yom HaKippurim, they're 10 days apart. So you have a window of time for this blowing of the trumpets. All right. The 10 days between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur are known as the days of awe in tradition, for one seeks out those who need to ask for forgiveness, and the 10 days are a time of introspection. Yom Kippur has two primary functions. By the way, I always see on the calendar, I don't know how many of you, even on English, on American calendars, you've seen Yom Kippur, right? You always think, what is that? My mom used to call it Yom Kippur. Didn't know what it was. So, she'd say, what's this Yom Kippur? They didn't have any idea what it was about. And Mom, it's Yom Kippur. All right, so here's the point. Yom Kippur has two primary functions. First, the tabernacle and all its furniture are cleansed of inadvertent contamination and uncleanness. And second, all the people, including the high priest, are cleansed, allowing them future access to the presence of God in the tabernacle. Yom HaKippurim is about the tabernacle, about the temple. The point is this, that during the year, accidentally, individuals came into the temple or the tabernacle with defilement. They came in there defiled. And again, it was accidental. And in God's grace and mercy, he did not destroy them because it was unintentional. They didn't know that they were unclean. Now, remember, being unclean is not a sin. Not using the remedy to become clean is a sin. There is no sin in being unclean. Unclean happens by living your life. But there is a sin in not becoming clean before you enter the tabernacle or the temple. And there were people who, for whatever reason, throughout the year, had brought defilement into the tabernacle. And you have to have a reset button. And Yom HaKippurim is that day where you say, okay, we're hitting the reset button, and we're going to make everything clean again. Because the tabernacle was a picture of the world to come. It's a picture of God's eternal kingdom. So you can't have death in there. You can't have sin in there. Everything is supposed to be pure. Yeah.
I'd say your sickness, it's no
Yeah.
lane, nothing.
Yeah, you can't have
It's
anything
life.
in there that's, in our Torah portion today, we're not going to discuss this, but it's in chapter 23 of Deuteronomy. I went one time to what's called this, I've been many times to this particular session. There's a thing called the Society of Biblical Literature. And they bring scholars from all over the world, literally, to come to these meetings. And you sit and you listen to papers being read by scholars. And I went to one that was dealing with people who had, they were quadriplegics, paraplegics, and they were upset with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were very angry because if you were a paraplegic, if you were a quadriplegic, and there's actually a number of other things listed in Deuteronomy 23, you cannot go into the tabernacle or later the temple. And they felt that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was very, very mean and was very unkind for not letting people who, because of a birth defect, nothing that they could control, were not allowed to go into the tabernacle or the temple. They felt like this was unfair. And so they were writing papers basically saying, what kind of God would say to somebody like me, you can't come into my house. I'm in a wheelchair, nothing I can do about this. It's not my fault. But here's the thing. The tabernacle was a picture of the world to come. It was a picture of the heavenly realm brought down. So you can't have any imperfection there. You can't bring an animal in there that's imperfect. You can't bring a human in there that's imperfect. Now that doesn't mean that somebody can't go in there for you. Somebody can go in there for you. But you can't go in there. Not like that. This is why almost every individual that Yeshua heals in the Gospels are individuals who cannot go in the temple or the tabernacle. Not the way they were. And he restores them, and they're able to go in the tabernacle temple. And he says, yeah, go offer what Moses said to offer and make things right. Okay.
So if they were to go in and they were not complete, would they die?
Yes, on purpose. If they go in on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, with intent. Yeah.
I think it also shows that when they say you're not allowed, it's actually saying when you are allowed, when you are accepted into the ultimate thing, you will be perfect.
Absolutely.
You will be whole.
Right.
So it's a great thing to look forward to.
That's something to look forward to. But I can see why people who are not whole would find that reading of Deuteronomy disturbing to them. They would say, I can't go in. All right.
Also, Brent, we're so removed from, we never lived during the time of the temple or the tabernacle.
Right.
Tabernacle. So
It's very difficult for us. We don't know what it's like to say, well, you can't go, a person can't go in because of their disability. See, we would say, well, that seems unkind, that seems unfair. But God is saying, look,
It's not politically correct.
it's not politically correct.
Violate the ADA.
Because I'm building a picture here. And the picture is wholeness and fullness. And if a person comes in here, and by the way, a sacrifice can't come in there that's not whole. The priest can't come in there if they're not whole. You have to be, and here's the point. Not only do you have to be whole, but you have to be at your fullest levels of holiness, fullest levels of bodily fluid. Here's an example. If you have a cut and you've been bleeding out for a little while, you can't go in until you've waited a while and the blood levels have gone back to where they're supposed to be. If you've had a seminal emission, that's a life fluid, you can't go in until you've waited a day. And the fluid level comes back to you're diminished. It's a life fluid. So any life fluids, the two primary, blood and semen, you can't go in if they're diminished. Because he's trying to make a point. Even they can't go in for a period of time until the levels come back to where they're supposed to be. So when you have a woman with an issue of blood, she's hemorrhaging, she can't go in. Now once the hemorrhaging stops and the blood levels come back, she can do a purification, come back in.
Back to your point where the woman with the hemorrhage, when she reached out to touch the wings of Yeshua, his garment, she was restored so that she could again go back in and make proper sacrifice.
By the way, I want to say this. This is controversial, but it shouldn't be. Yeshua was unclean. Unclean is not a sin. The remedy, not accepting the remedy for being unclean, is a sin. But if you live in this world, if you operate in this world, you become unclean. But that's not a sin. It's a sin to go into the temple without doing a purification and then going in. But other than that, so Yom Kippurim is the day when we do the reset button. Yeah.
And that misunderstanding is why people who say are in a wheelchair, not their own fault, don't understand, because they equate, like most of us Westerners, equate unclean with sin.
We do.
And so they, as you said, they say, well, it's not my fault that I can't go in. Well, right, it's not your fault, but that's not the point.
Right. This is God's house, and so he gets to set the rules for who comes in. And you can have somebody go in for you. You can have somebody go in for you and offer sacrifices on your behalf. All right. Let me move on. We got to move on. Wow. All right. Sukkot, the last festival in the fall. Sukkot commemorates the fact that the children of Israel lived in booths when they came out of Egypt. The first Moedim focuses on Passover, and the last Moedim focuses on Passover. Let me say this. The number one theme running throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, the number one theme of redemption and deliverance is Passover. It's everywhere. If we had time, you could see how much the theme of Passover is woven into everything in the Hebrew Scriptures, because it's this massive picture of God's deliverance and his taking control of his people, demonstrating that he was powerful and that he could deliver his people. So it's this theme that works its way through so many parts of the Hebrew Scripture and Apostolic Scripture. By the time you get to the very end in the book of the Apocalypse, notice the plagues that you see in Exodus are there as well, and we're back in the garden again. Gani Dan. We're back in Gani Dan. It's all come full circle. So it's interesting that the festival, you have Pesach, which commemorates coming out of Egypt, and then Sukkot. They lived in booths when they came out of Egypt. And so he says, I never want you to forget that I brought you out, and I kept you for 40 years in the wilderness, and you lived in these booths. So every year, live in these booths to remind yourself what it was like. And so Sukkot is this kind of going back to Passover, coming out of our houses and saying, you know what, we're going to go back and live, so to speak, as if we were in the wilderness again. To kind of have that wilderness mentality. And be thankful that he brought us out, and that he cared for us for 40 years, that our shoes did not wear out, we had food, we had water, everything was taken care of. And so Passover and Sukkot are these two huge. By the way, those of you that want the lulav and etrog for Sukkot, let me know. I mentioned this earlier. We're ordering those. So those are the four species that we find in Nehemiah: the myrtle, the etrog, the willow, and the palm. Thank you. All right. For each of these festivals, there is a book of the Bible that you study. Let's test your memory. This ought to be good. What book of the Bible do we study for Yom Teruah. Nobody knows?
Jonah?
No,
No, what's?
that's the next one. That's Yom HaKippurim. Huh? We studied, no, we study, I just forgot. Now I got what you got.
Should I pause the recording for a minute?
Yeah, probably.
How about Nehemiah?
No, it's not Nehemiah. We do Job. We do
Which
Job.
one is Ruth?
Huh?
Which one is Ruth?
Shavuot.
Shavuot.
Ruth is Shavuot. So let's work our way back. We do for Sukkot, we do the book of Ecclesiastes or Kohelet. For Yom HaKippurim, we do Jonah. And then for Yom Teruah, I know what we do. We actually, it's not a book. We do the 21st chapter of Genesis and the 22nd chapter, which has the ram's horn with Isaac caught in the thicket. So we do chapter 21 of Genesis and chapter 22. And then for Yom HaKippurim, we do the book of Jonah. By the way, if you do a comparison, and we'll do this year again, if you do a comparison between Yom HaKippurim and the book of Jonah, there's tons of comparisons. Tons. And then Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. And how does Kohelet end? This is the whole duty of man, fear God and keep his commandments. What he talks about, Kohelet talks about life under the sun. How do we live life in this world? And a great book on just so many levels. We've gone through that in the 2. We'll go through it again. It's a great, great book. All right. It's interesting. According to Nehemiah 8, the children of Israel did not keep the festival of Sukkot from the time of Joshua. Once Joshua came on the scene and they conquered the land, they did not keep the festival. It was restored when they found a copy of the Torah. And in a way, you know what, we've kind of come back to that as well. How did we lose this biblical calendar? And the way we lost it was we were never connected to the people of Israel, to the land of Israel, or to the scriptures of Israel. And that massive disconnection had us taking on holidays. We took on holidays that were replacements. And we didn't even know that that's what they were. I mean,
Yeah, Christmas is actually the birth of Solomon.
yeah, I mean, we had Christ Mass, and then we had Easter, and we didn't even know these were the things we had. And then to tell you, you know that when you look at your calendar, you have St. Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day. This is coming out of Catholicism, where they're venerating saints and honoring saints. Okay, so this is the kind of calendar that you have if you're following a Gregorian calendar. So, like Nehemiah, in a sense, what's happened is our generation has found the Torah again, so to speak, and has come back to these festivals, realizing that they never went anywhere. They were always there, waiting to be rediscovered. And we would read the biblical text. I've given you a handout before on how the Gospel of John is built around all these festivals. It was there if we were willing to see it. But we would read right past it because it wasn't in our orbit. It wasn't something we were focusing on. It wasn't a calendar we followed. So one of the things that's happened is we've come back to this calendar to say this is a calendar that God established that we have to come back to because it sets up, it's the first coming, it's the second coming. And I give you a handout for those of you that want it. I'm not going to pass it out again, but for those of you who want it, I detail how the birth of Christ happened at Sukkot. And in fact, how the conception of Yochanan and the conception of Yeshua and the birth of Yeshua and the birth of Yochanan were all on festival days. Okay, so I go into the detail of that and how we get there. Go with me to Luke chapter 1 for just a moment. Luke chapter 1. I want to show you how you work through this really quick. I'm just going to give you the one key that then starts the dominoes falling so you can trace this for yourself, and I'll give you the header for those of you that want it. Look at Luke chapter 1, verse 5. It says, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. That's the key. These are the division of Abijah. And that leads us then back to Chronicles, where King David put the priestly orders into 24 orders, and the division of Abijah was the 8th order. And when you know when these orders serve, then you can map it out chronologically, and that's how you're able to go back and see when this happened. Yeah.
I was under the impression that each section had 2 times a year that they.
Yes, they do. I mentioned that in the paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also overlap with Sabbath.
They overlap, yeah, and they serve from Sabbath to Sabbath. If you want to see the paper, anyone that wants it, I can send it to you electronically, and then you can see it and map it out for yourself. So it's interesting that Sukkot is the time of Yeshua's birth. If the biblical text is helping us here, so that's significant, and that Yeshua's conception is interesting. It's on Hanukkah. What's Hanukkah about? Hanukkah is about the light of the world, rededication of the what? The temple. So here you have, and John 10 mentions he's in Solomon's portico on the Feast of Dedication. So this intertestamental observance is also interesting, mentioned in John.
There are also writings out there that indicate that Jesus was not born in an inn.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
He would never go to an inn.
Yeah.
If you were Jewish, you would not go to a Gentile inn. Those were places where not all good things happened. But that he was born in a sukkah.
Yeah. I want to go. We'll be Deuteronomy chapter 20. We're going to one thing from our Torah portion. We're out of time, but I want to go to Deuteronomy chapter. We started in verse 10, but I want to focus on 2 things. Number 1, Deuteronomy 22. This is the heart of Torah. And by the way, this section, we mentioned it before. Deuteronomy 12 to 26 is built off of the 10 Commandments, connected to the 10 Commandments. Okay. Let me show you how that is, just in the 2 examples we're going to give here. Deuteronomy 22, verse 1 says, "You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray, and hide yourself from them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall remain with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. You shall do the same with his donkey, and so shall you do with his garment. With any lost thing of your brother's which he has lost, and you have found, you shall do likewise. You must not hide yourself." How many of you remember the one growing up as a kid? Finders, keepers, losers, weepers, right? That's not a Torah principle. The Torah doesn't say, if you find it, you get to keep it. The Torah says, if you find it, you need to find the person that it belongs to and get it back to them. Because that's what you'd want to happen for you. Right? Not, well, look at what I found. It's now mine. I get to keep it. No. If you find something, it's your responsibility to not just keep it, but to keep it so that you can get it back to the person it belongs to. So this goes to the issue of stealing. Thou shalt not steal. If you keep something that you find and it has identifying marks on it, like the person's name,
That'd be a clue.
that'd be a clue that it's somebody else's.
An address.
A name, yeah, something that says, that screams, this belongs to somebody else. Please return. That tells you that if you keep it, you're stealing. And the text says, thou shalt not steal. Okay. Now, so just showing you the connection. Now, here's the other one, last one. Look at verse 6 of chapter 22. Interesting one. We're going to play the idea here. Where have we heard this before? He says, now here's what the rabbis call the least of the commandments. The least of the commandments. But look at this commandment. It says, if a bird's nest happens to be before you along the way, in any tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, while with the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go and take the young for yourself. Now listen to this, that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days.
Almost like honoring your mother and your father.
Yes, that's where it's connected to. It's like honoring your mother and your father.
That last phrase is in there.
That last phrase is in Deuteronomy 5 for honoring your father and mother, that it may go well with you and that you may prolong your days. So we have a mother bird and we have honor your father and mother. That it may go well with you and you may prolong your days. That it may go well with you and you prolong your days. He says, if you happen to come across, whether in a tree or on the ground, a nest, and there is a mother there with her egg, either with the eggs, potential children, or with the chicks there. They're already hatched. Before you take those from her, send her off. Honor your mother and father. Don't cause her grief. Don't cause her distress. It would be distressful to her for you to take her. Why is she there? What is the instincts of a mother with her children?
Protect them.
Protect them. That's the motherly instinct. That's going to be her instinct. So rather than cause her distress, send her away. Shoo her away so that she flies away. Then you can take it if you need to. But don't cause her stress. There are multiple commandments in the Torah related to how we treat animals. Related to how we treat animals. Because the Torah knows this, that there is a correlation between how we treat animals and how we treat human beings.
Very true.
There's a correlation. Which is why I never like to see young children treating animals in an unkind way. Because it starts to correlate into how you treat human beings. You cannot torture. And even the psychological treatment of an animal. He says, for it will not go well with you. You won't have long days. Honor your father and mother. So you see this mother bird, shoo her away, so that her natural instincts don't kick in, and that she wants to fight. Then you can take the eggs for the chicks. But don't cause her stress. Don't do that to her. That it may go well with you, and that you may have length of days. It's connected to honoring your father and mother. All this whole section from chapter 12, 26 is linked up with the Ten Commandments. And connecting each one of these is somehow connected with the Ten Commandments. So if we were to follow every one of these, they all trace back to the 10. The 10 are the header that funnel down to, and here's another fascinating thing about this text. Did you notice this? Look at these various and sundry commandments. They're intermixed. They're all over the place. Things about clothing, things about making sure that you have a railing on your house, on your roof, so nobody falls off. All kinds of interconnected things that are they seem random. Here's what the Torah is trying to say to us. All of life is holistic. There's not a this or that, it's all whole. Yeah.
We probably can sum it up with one word: kindness.
Yes. Kindness. Compassion. Or to put it another way, love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God, in other words. Or to put it in Yeshua's terms, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Don't do unto others as you would have others not do to you. In other words, compassion, kindness, treat others the way you want to be treated. But, going back to what I said about animals just for a moment. In studying, I've said this before, in studying serial killers, every one of them, to to a person started off killing animals.
Or torturing them.
Torturing and killing. It's practice. So as parents and as grandparents, be careful. Watch your children and your grandchildren and don't let them ever treat animals with unkindness, because it does translate into how they treat human beings. And these animals are still a creation of God.
Yep.
They're still a creation of God. They have feelings. They can be hurt. He does give certain animals to us, domestic animals to us for food. But then he says, make sure that when you slaughter this animal, you do so as quickly and as painlessly as possible. Don't have this animal suffer.
That doesn't mean that every child who grew up.
No. But the ones that they've been able to interview.
Right. I just wanted.
Yeah. You're right.
I know you do that.
Yeah. No. Not every torture. Yeah. Everybody. I should say everybody. Many people. Mark, you have a confession? Mark has a confession he'd like to make? No. Watch your back. Mark did something mean to an animal once. No, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, I was going to say everybody. Many of us, at one point or another, probably did something to an animal that we shouldn't have.
You pulled the wings off a grasshopper, I know.
Yes, I'm sure I did. How many of you, so this is my, we did this growing up. I lived in South Carolina, and my grandmother lived in South Carolina, and we'd go to her house and we would get the jar and we'd put holes in the top of it and fireflies, and I'd set it by the bed. And because then during the night they pop on and off, it was just really cool to watch. But I never thought that we might be killing them.
Right.
Probably were killing them.
We put the grass in.
I put some old grass in there too, but they probably thought to themselves, what are you doing to us?
We don't like grass.
We don't like grass. So, all of us have probably done something to animals that we might regret, but, so you're right, it doesn't make, but I'm saying the ones that we have incarcerated. All right, Dale, go ahead.
I had a fishing one time when I was just I was in high school still, and on this end of the pier, there's these kids down there, and they're catching these bullheads, and they're just whacking them and killing them and all this stuff, and I'm just kind of blowing it off. And there's an elderly fellow there, he's out there fishing too. He pulls up one, and the kids run over, hey, can I have your bullhead? We want to kill him and all that stuff. And the guy, just pretty profound. I mean, for me at that time, it was like, why kill something you're not going to eat? He unhooked it and dropped it back in the water. I thought that was pretty impressive.
That's cool.
That's a great view, just like what you were saying.
Yeah. The useless slaughter of animals that's messed up. Just to kill an animal. I've heard people, even Christ believers, that say they want to go hunting just to kill an animal. And I don't hold to that being a biblical approach. If you're hunting the animal for food, that's one thing, but just to hunt the animal to hunt, absolutely not. Yes.
I think the thing also that makes it worse is like what you said, regardless of what they're starting with, it's the anger that gives potential. The way that they're venting their anger to have potential to do that. And it's like if you're totally not controlling, so someone with kinesthetic anger, that is a bad thing. It's going to its animals first, because those are the victims that won't defend themselves.
Right.
And so eventually, but a lot of times it's impulsive and stuff too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, the whole thing, it just, again, it's another example of a world without God and a world that does things their own way.
Absolutely. So this is, the Torah is trying to help us prevent moving in the wrong directions. It gives us the keys to say, you know what, to make sure that you don't go certain directions. This is the things you should do to internally to deal. Okay, so were there any real quick? Were there any questions on the Moedim? I didn't. Yes, go ahead.
Going back to the scope, I agree that we need to look back at God bringing us out of Egypt. Each and every one of us, He did that. And what it took to bring us out of Egypt. And now we are in the wilderness, looking forward to the promised land. But also, I suppose, it's a time of harvest. We would be looking forward to that time of the great harvest when Yeshua reaps the earth, gathers us together as sheep, delivers us to the Father, and we will be His children, and He
I mean, that's the key, yeah.
Two questions. One is for the blowing of the horns. Who is to blow? Is it anyone or certain?
No, in Numbers 28, excuse me, 28, I think it's 1 and 2, these trumpets were blown initially from the tabernacle and then the temple later on. So they would initiate there, so that the sighting of the moon would be done by somebody in the temple that the priest could then question and verify as to the validity of their sighting.
Okay.
So it would be done there because otherwise we have no controls.
Will it be a Levite?
Be a Levite, yeah.
And going back to Moedim, the scripture says when it's listed in Moedim that Shabbat is the first one. So I think kind of like what Dan was saying, that the differentiation in it is a meeting place.
Yeah, Moedim, yeah, but it's
not a named, dated festival associated.
right.
Right.
It's certainly not a cog, which is a
Right,
pilgrimage.
right.
So
A lot of fun.
But if you go back to that in Leviticus 23, it is a Moedim.
I mean, I want to look. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's
We're
look
going
at
to
that.
be correct.
Yeah, let's look at. Let's see. So verse 4, these are the in Moeday, Adonai, Mikra, Kodesh.
Right up in the first verse, it says, tell the people of Israel the designated times of Adonai, which are to proclaim as holy convocations on my designated time. Work
Yeah,
is to
see,
be done
but-
on 6 days.
Yeah, see, it says
So the Shabbat is, I just assume it as it's a weekly Moedim.
yeah.
That would-
But I guess I'm not seeing
that.
that because it says this. It says so. Verse 2.
The designated times of Adonai. the holy
Yeah,
convocations,
so
holy
verse 3 is Sheshet, so 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day is Shabbat, Shabbaton, a holy convocation. Okay, so then you should do work on the Sabbath. There's a Sabbath, the Lord, in all your dwellings. And then in verse 4 it says, these are the feasts. I don't know. It's
Well, is the Hebrew for those appointed times in, not the English, but the Hebrew in verse 2, isn't that Moedim?
Doesn't it set them
I
apart
mean,
by saying
to
3
be
times?
technically correct.
yeah,
Those are close.
yeah. You have 3 of them that are taught that become
Right.
taught,
Right,
which
right,
are the
right.
pilgrims.
Right, we're not talking about
I
those.
thought that. Okay, so hold on. So speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, Moeday, the feast, Moeday. They're translating it feasts.
Yeah.
Here again is a problem because they're not all feasts. Moeday, Adonai, Asher Tikra, which you shall proclaim, holy convocations, and they are the Moedim, Moeday construct. 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day is they say it's Shabbat Shabbaton. It's a Sabbath, a solemn rest. That's how they're translating it. A holy convocation. All work. You should not do any work. It is a Sabbath to Adonai in all your dwellings. Okay. Then verse 4. These are the Moeday Adonai. Again, holy convocations. So yeah, I mean.
Isn't Moedim appointed times of?
Yeah, it's construct. Yeah. One times of. Yes. So I don't know. I'll do some more work on that. That's interesting.
If you look at 2 as the introduction to 3, just,
Yeah, I gotta go back and look. See how it's syntactically worded. All right.